What's in progress?
Fine.
Hi, Shelley.
Hi there.
Give people a few more minutes to hop on here. I'm having people join the waiting room.
No problem.
All right. I think we'll get started. Thank you to everybody who's joining us today. We have a special guest, Shelley from the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, who has graciously extended an offer to come and talk to the town about an affordable housing trust. As you're aware, this is something that will be on an article on our town meeting warrant for this upcoming town meeting. And so I just want everybody to have a chance to get an understanding of what exactly an affordable housing trust is and how it can be beneficial to the town of Nahant. Shelley does have a PowerPoint presentation that she is going to be going through, and then I believe she'll have some time for question and answers afterwards. People are still jumping in right now, so but Shelley, let me see if I can give you screen sharing. Great. I think you should be able to share.
Great, thank you. Just let me know when you want to get started.
Shelley's mic is muted.
Yep, Shelley, I think we're good to go.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, this is looking like a big old waste of time.
My name is Shelley, and I'm with MHP, the Mass Housing Partnership. And a lot of my work is, the reason why I'm here tonight is because a lot of my work is around supporting communities in Massachusetts that either already have an affordable housing trust fund or communities that are considering establishing one or actively moving forward on establishing one. So my organization, which is a quasi-state agency, has some capacity where we support communities across the state just to help you build your housing infrastructure to address your local housing needs. So that's why I'm here tonight. Just a tiny bit about our organization. For those of you who may not be as familiar, MHP is a quasi-state agency that's also organized as a nonprofit, and we have four main ways that we kind of are outward-facing teams. We have a Center for Housing Data, so a few staff that are collecting and analyzing and sharing data to help local, regional, and state policy to inform housing policy. My team is a community assistance team, and we're really out in communities trying to help build the local capacity to support affordable housing. We also work with housing authorities as well as nonprofit developers We have a lending team, so we've lent over $1.4 billion to support affordable housing, 27,000 units of affordable rental housing. And then we have a home ownership team that helps to support first-time home buyers in the state, making it more accessible for moderate income households to purchase a home. So tonight I am going to go through a few kind of categories. One, just some very basics about the Housing Trust Fund statute. And we're talking about the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund statute, and then a little bit on trust operations and best practices, just based on years of working in communities and working with different affordable housing trusts and some of the things that we recommend, just based on what we've observed. And then last, I'm going to talk about the kinds of um, programs, developments, projects that trusts can be supporting financially. It's going to feel like a lot of information. It is a lot of information. So I'm sorry if you end up feeling overwhelmed. I'll pause after each section and just see if there are questions. But Allison has the slides and I've told her she can distribute them, she can post them. So you can go back and look through it. My contact information is at the end. You can feel free to reach out at any time. So first, some of the basics. So the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund is organized under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 55C. It was signed into law in 2005, and it really was the Community Preservation Act and more communities having funds through CPA that need to be spent on housing. That was the impetus to pass this enabling legislation so that communities could more easily establish a trust. So it's just created by a majority vote of your local legislative body, so your town meeting. It's led by a board of trustees that's appointed locally. And because it's a municipal entity, it's subject to public procurement, designer selection, conflict of interest, and public meeting laws like all of your other municipal boards. The statute says that the purpose is to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in municipalities for the benefit of low and moderate income households and for the funding of community housing as defined in the CPA statute. So everything that's allowable under community housing with CPA is allowable for a municipal affordable housing trust fund. I have low and moderate income households bold because this statute doesn't actually define what low and moderate income means. So we are always suggesting with communities that establish a trust that you early on define what low and moderate income means for your community for purposes of the trust activities. And we suggest that you look at existing definitions. So if you're wanting any house that you invest in to be counted on the subsidized housing inventory, then that would be affordable at 80% of the area at median income. If you want it to be the same as CPA, the Community Preservation Act, then that's 100% of the area at median income. The state has an affordable housing trust fund that defines moderate income up to 110% of the area median income. So it's just something to keep in mind, that don't assume that people know what that means, that you really need to define that for your community. Very generally, a housing trust can address affordable housing needs in the community. It can support local control of housing initiatives. The trust is allowed by statute to engage in real estate activity. So the trust, if they had funds, could buy or sell real estate. The trust can make timely decisions because, unlike the Community Preservation Committee, where their suggested allocations go through town meeting, the trust actually doesn't have to go to town meeting. The trust can move a bit more nimbly in case there's a house or a site that shows up that comes onto the market. The trust can move a bit more nimbly. And then the trust as a municipal entity can be collecting funds from a variety of different sources. And we're seeing communities be more and more creative with how they're trying to raise funds for their trust. The statute is very simple. It's not very long and it's not very prescriptive, but it does say that you need a minimum of 5 trustees. This must include the chief executive officer. So in a town with a select board, that would be 1 select board member needs to be appointed to the trust. We do have communities that have 7 that they've decided to write a bylaw or an ordinance, and they specify 7 trustees. Some do a little bit more, but 5 and 7, I think, is the most common. The trustees are appointed by, it depends on the structure of your community, the mayor. Sometimes the city council has some oversight to that. In your community, it'd be the select board. And then the statute says 2-year terms, and that it just specifies these are public agents. So similar to members of your other boards, they're treated similarly as kind of special municipal employees. But that's it. There isn't any other prescription. It's very simple. And then the statute allows for 16 explicit powers. So these are some of the big ones: accepting and receiving real property, purchase and retaining real or personal property, selling, leasing, exchanging, or conveying any personal, mixed, or real property. So there are 16 different powers. The statute does allow these powers to be modified. It also allows for powers to be added to the trust, as long as they're kind of in line with the statute. You just put on the bits. So I'm just putting out one kind of case study of Brewster on the Cape. So Brewster years ago had a different form of a trust. In 2018, they dissolved that trust to establish a municipal affordable housing trust fund. And then the funds that they had in the previous trust, they transferred to this new trust, the municipal trust, $80,000. They initially started, they did some work of kind of researching the needs in the community. They developed a mission statement, and then they identified some goals and some priority initiatives for the trust. And early on, they sponsored a public housing forum to engage members of the community that were interested, to share what they had been working on and the direction that they were headed, and to receive some feedback to work into their plans. By their bylaw, they have a bylaw. Their trustee structure is 7 are required members, the select board member, which is by statute. And then they've given their town administrator or a designee of the town administrator a spot on the board. In the years that they've had their trust, the town administrator has appointed the assistant town administrator, who has been a staff person on the board. They have a seat for their housing partnership to have an appointee to the trust. Their CPC, Community Preservation Committee, has an appointee, and their planning board has an appointee. And that's based on their bylaw. They've required that. And then they have 2 citizens at large. We have some communities that have the minimum of 5, and they don't add any more requirements to what that looks like. We have some that have more citizens at large and fewer board appointees. It looks different in every community based on a lot of different things. But for Brewster, this is how they decided to do it. And then they did put a restriction on a power, and this restriction is actually really it's a significant restriction. This is very unusual, but they require allocations over $50,000 to be subject to select board approval. That's really unusual to have it that low of an amount require select board approval, but that's what they felt like that they needed to do in their community. So just one example of one community. At this point, we have 100 that we know of. We have 152 communities that have an affordable housing trust fund. So a significant percentage of communities in our state. So I wanted just to pause briefly if there are any questions at this point, if that's okay to, based on protocol of the community, if anyone wants to unmute yourself and ask a question or raise your hand.
Yeah, I guess if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand and I can unmute.
Okay. Okay. So I just want to switch a little bit to trust operations and best practices. So this is some of it's forward thinking. If you do establish a trust, and just some suggestions for moving forward. And it's just simply our suggestions based on what we've seen in other communities. It's not a requirement in any way. But this is just a graph that I use sometimes, or an image of the different kinds of funding sources that communities are using to fund their trusts. And they don't exist in all of these, don't exist in every community, but we're just seeing a greater variety of resources. So the Community Preservation Act is definitely the most common, and over 80% of trust communities have the Community Preservation Act as well. But we also see that in some communities they have inclusionary zoning, and there might be an in lieu of payment that's allowed, and in some communities that in lieu of payment is directed to the trust. We have a community on the Cape that has a cell phone tower, and the lease payment is sent to the trust every year. It's not a lot of money, but it's a relied amount. It's a set amount that the trust can rely on that they know they're going to get. We have some communities have transferred free cash funds from the general fund to their trust. Communities like Truro and Brookline. Um, there may be special bylaws or ordinance payments that could be directed to the trust. Somerville is a city that has an ordinance that it has a payment that's sent to the trust. And then short-term rental fees, we have some communities that are directing some of their short-term rental fees to their trust, like Gloucester and some communities on the Cape. We have one community that has municipal bond ability. So Medfield does not have CPA, but they did at a town election vote to allow the trust to bond up to $1 million against the municipal budget to fund different efforts. As the last I've heard, they've not used that. They've found other ways to support affordable housing, but it's available for them. We have a community on the Cape. Orleans has a tax override worth $275,000, and they see it as a permanent override year to year. So they're the only trust that I know of that's been able to access a line of credit from a bank because they have this steady form of income. Trust can bring in donations. We have the community of Wellfleet on the Cape, where they have at different times run a fundraiser in the summer to try to benefit from the huge influx of summer residents in Wellfleet to raise money for their housing efforts. You may know that there are many bills in the legislature of communities trying to get a real estate transfer fee capacity to raise funds for affordable housing. There may be a developer negotiated fee. You need to be very careful about how you do that. But we do have a community, Norfolk, years ago had what is referred to as a friendly 40B, and it was a homeownership development, and it was a local developer that was familiar to the town. And they negotiated that $10,000 of the sale, the profit of the for-profit units, of the market rate units, would be directed to the town, and the town then the select board directed those to the trust. So it was a significant influx of funds for the trust to be focusing on affordable housing in Norfolk. And then sometimes I hear communities talk about the marijuana tax. I don't yet know of any community that has directed those to the trust, but it gets brought up occasionally. And there may be other sources as well. I'm sorry. So tax title sales is another possibility. We actually have Chelsea. Instead of the cash from tax title sales, they've transferred some of their tax title parcels to the trust to then redevelop into affordable housing. So the good news is just that, or the encouraging news is that we're seeing communities try to find a multiple of sources to help fund their trust, not just CPA, but CPA definitely is the most common. So getting started, we do suggest that trusts take a little bit of time. Once trustees are appointed, that the trustees take a little bit of time to do some work. There can be a lot of pressure just to jump in and do something, but we oftentimes find that those trusts end up spinning their wheels because the needs are always so great. The resources are never enough. So we do suggest that new trustees starting out that you take some time to do a little bit of work. So to determine the housing needs locally, many communities have a housing production plan or a needs analysis. So we suggest that trustees spend some time reviewing what those plans reveal about the needs in the community, and then think a little bit about setting some priorities. So instead of trying to do everything, try to really be realistic about what are the one or two, maybe three things that you're going to focus on initially, that you're going to put your effort into, because especially for your community, Nahant is very small and you have limited land mass. So be thoughtful about what makes sense for your community. And then you could create benchmarks. You don't need to do this, but Somerville has it's actually in their ordinance for their trust that they want a certain percentage of their funds to go to households earning 50% of the area at median income or below. And they just have that benchmark because they want to make sure that they're not just investing at the higher end of low income housing, but that they're meeting some of the deeper affordability needs in the town as well. And part of the initial work should be familiarizing yourself with the local housing needs. So your housing plan, whatever your housing plan, but there's also other tools like MHP has Data Town. It has data points from communities all across the state. You could even benchmark yourself against other communities. So on the left, it just shows your building type. And on the right, it shows the cost burden of renters and homeowners in your community, and you can just get some familiarity about where the greatest needs are or just where the needs are. So you're familiar with that as you're considering what to work on, what to invest in. You can learn a little bit about affordable housing finance. It's very, very complicated. We never expect anyone in any community to become an expert on it, but to have some familiarity if you're wanting to, if your trust sees itself as investing in affordable housing development, which you may or may not. So we have the Housing Toolbox, another online tool with many different resources. In some communities, I've suggested that the trust actually invite an affordable housing developer to come and sit with them and talk through a real development project, and to talk through kind of the pro forma and what it took to get the deal together, and how the town or the city was helpful in that, so that the trustees can just become more kind of comfortable with the affordable housing space and what it takes to support affordable housing. Again, these are just suggestions. You don't have to do any of this. It's just suggestions. And then we're suggesting that trusts take a little bit of time to do some basic things to consider the structure of how you're going to function. So a mission statement, a simple mission statement, and there are many examples of other trusts across the state, and I have a document of many of those mission statements, and happy to do follow-up when you get to that point. And then to think about what do you want to accomplish, and to set 2 or 3 measurable goals. I'm really encouraging trusts to have focus on a couple things and try to do those well instead of being stretched too thin. It's a volunteer board. Most trusts have very little paid staff support, so we want to try to keep it reasonable. And then this is just an example of a Wellfleet, a small community on the Cape, that they actually were very ambitious group of people, but they decided that one of their goals was to create 100 units of low and moderate income rental and homeownership housing over the next 5 years. And then they had another goal of a very, very ambitious goal of this significant uh, fundraising. And then under each goal, they created a variety of different strategies to help them reach that goal. So the goals are measurable. The strategies are most of them are pretty specific. So it's not only helping them as an action plan to move forward, but it also is helping the community understand how the trust sees its role in the community, what the trust is working on. It helps any developer or any nonprofit that would be interested in trying to access any funds that the trust has to create housing. It helps them understand what the trust is focused on, and a little bit of how they're operating. And then some trusts also will put together guidelines where they'll just have all of these different things together in one place. So again, it's easy for them. It's easy for new trustees as they come on. It's a place where the community can see all this information about the trust, as well as any entity or developer that might want to try to access resources. So the guideline, it's not fancy. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be a Word document of where the mission statement, goals, and strategies are, maybe some information about the roles and responsibilities of the trust, eligible funding activities, stipulations for funding. So this is where you could define low and moderate income for your trust. Any information about project monitoring, an application process, selection criteria, and an application. So this is perhaps feeling like it's getting way ahead of us, but this is just something that many trusts will do so that there's just clarity around how the trust functions, and so that it's not a secret or it's not hard for others to understand that as well. And then if you have different entities that are working on pieces of housing, we suggest having conversations early on about what the role of the trust will be versus other boards or other entities in town. We suggest you do that early, and it could be across multiple boards. So the graph is just from Manchester by the Sea's housing production plan. And in that community, they had a variety of housing strategies on the left. They determined some that were shorter term, some that were longer term. And then on the right, they identified the lead board or boards, just so it helps to keep from like stepping on toes. It provides a little bit of accountability, but having those kind of conversations early can really help to minimize, yes, um, just challenges down the road. And then we encourage transparency. We all know that housing in particular and development and housing development, affordable housing, that these can be very controversial. It can make people nervous. And so we really encourage that the community be very transparent about your affordable housing trust fund. Um, you might consider joint appointments if that is useful. It can be hard. You don't want people to be overcommitted with too many boards, but it can be helpful with communication. Reporting back regularly to key stakeholders, to different boards, to town meeting, putting a report in the town meeting report, promoting any efforts, using the web page on your town website, putting your information out there. If you end up passing a bylaw, having that on the website. Who sits on the board, if there's staff that supports the trust board, anything that you're investing in, your mission statement, like all these things you want to make it, you want to have it out there and have it easy for people to access. Because if there's a vacuum, if they don't hear, if they can't find anything, unfortunately, sometimes people will fill the vacuum and it won't always be the truth. So you just want to make sure that that you're open and that you make it easy for people to figure out what the trust is doing. And then the community can be working on just developing a general kind of culture of support for diverse housing options in the community and addressing housing needs. There are a variety of different tools around communicating around housing and housing needs. This is one that's a little bit, it's from several years ago, but it still is, it's an easy read and it's interesting. But there are others online as well, just to help you think about how are you going to talk about this in the community. And I think it's helpful for the trust as well as possibly other boards that they'll be working with closely to be thinking about what is the messaging? How are you going to talk about this in the community? How are you going to help people understand the need, different housing needs in the community, and that you're wanting to start addressing those really intentionally? So just some general stuff. I know that that's a lot and that it's really future thinking, but just an idea of instead of thinking that you create this board and appoint people and then you just get started, we really are encouraging boards to take some time to do a little bit of research and to really be thoughtful about what is your capacity and what are you going to be focusing on in the first few years in your community. Does anyone have any question or want to make a comment at this point?
Feel free to unmute yourself. You should be able to. Oh, yes, it looks like Tom Hamilton has a question.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Yes.
Is there anything that you recommend that towns do first, like define the strategy, what their target is, but just anything to improve the chance of success?
So to me, the first that trustees should be doing is getting familiar with the identified housing needs in the community so that you can at least start from a place of kind of data of understanding the needs. And so that's where I would suggest that you start to doing a little bit of that research. And then to be thinking among trustees of, given what you've learned about the needs in the community, what realistically makes sense for the trust to be focusing on for the first few years and to start, of course, we always talk about if there's the low hanging fruit, something that's a quick win. If there is something like that, that's great. Do that. But oftentimes there isn't, and you need to work towards that. So I think the next thing is just thinking realistically, based on the identified needs, what makes sense. And with Nahant, you have 3,300 people or somewhere around there. It's the geographically the smallest community in the state. You don't have a bunch of land, and you'll see images of developments, and they happen partly because these communities have land, and so that you have those kind of restrictions. So think realistically, based on what the assets that you do have, the current climate in your community, what makes sense. And I think that a couple people have some ideas there, but I think just kind of that brainstorming, possibly having some not just interviews, but talk with other stakeholders about like the select board and others about what people think makes sense for this trust, and then to work on, um, in my opinion, creating two, possibly two measurable goals, and then come up with some strategies to help create a bit of an action plan to move forward over the next 3 to 5 years. So that would be my suggestion of how to move forward.
Okay, can I just follow up quick? So
Yes.
would you suggest maybe drafting like your strategy and your objectives and your goals and so forth, and then reviewing that with the town, not just the board?
Yes, I do. I do suggest in communities, and the culture is just different in different communities, but to have, I think it is a great idea to have some way to solicit feedback from the community and allow people to respond. So the example that I gave of Brewster is that that's what they did. They did some internal work. They created kind of some goals and some initiatives, and then on paper, and then they had a public kind of forum to to present that and to create space for people to comment and to respond. So I would suggest that, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Looks like we have somebody else with a hand up. It just says Nahant resident. Are you able to unmute? No.
Hello.
Person labeled as,
Oh,
oh,
hi.
there we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay, if you hear the barking dogs, you'll guess who it is. It's Debbie Vanderslice, 368 Nahant Road. I have a question. Does the board have the power to appropriate funds without a vote at town meeting? It was mentioned earlier that this board will have some special powers that kind of fast track things. So an example would be, and I'm just throwing this out here, say the town or say this board wants to allocate 10% of the town's Airbnb revenue to the trust. Is this something the board can just say, hey, it's a good idea, or because it entails money, does that have to go before the town at town meeting?
So that direction, I believe, would still have to go to town meeting, but once the money is in the trust account, then the trust can make appropriations, allocate those funds without going to town meeting.
Okay,
But
but any,
you still have to go through the town process to direct that money to the trust.
okay, so like some of the examples you gave earlier, it sounded like money was appropriated, but it had to go through the town meetings.
Yes.
Unless it's like a bequeath or a donation or whatever.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So then the statute does say, though, that once money is in the trust account, that even at the end of the year, it doesn't go back to the general budget. It remains trust property.
Okay, but the general budget funds, should the town decide to allocate some, does have to go before a town meeting vote.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yep. The only way that it wouldn't is we have some inclusionary zoning bylaws where it's written into the bylaw that any in lieu of payment is directed to the trust. So that if it's in the bylaw, it wouldn't have to go to town meeting again. But that's because it's written into the bylaw.
So
So
those
that
would
would
be,
be the only time when when town money wouldn't have to go back to town meeting because it's already directed in the bylaw.
and that's the town bylaw,
Yes. Yes.
which,
Yes.
yes, which has to be approved by town meeting. Okay, great. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears and just talk about the many different kinds of projects or developments that trust can be investing in. And we use the language of CPA because the statutes are so closely aligned. So I am using the acquire, create, preserve, and support. Some of these examples were actually technically funded by the Community Preservation Committee and not the trust, but all of these are the kinds of projects that a trust could invest in. So this is an example in Barnstable where it was an existing apartment complex where there were only a portion of the units that were restricted as affordable, and a nonprofit developer, POA, was able to access some local funds to leverage additional revenue to buy this entire development and put restrictions, affordability restrictions on almost all the units. There were There are still a couple that are market rate because there were some tenants at the time who were not income qualified and they didn't want to displace anyone, but the majority of these are now affordable in perpetuity because of these local funds that were contributed. So a trust could invest in helping an affordable housing developer purchase existing housing to make affordable housing. And then we have a variety of trusts that have what can be called generally a buy down program. So it's helping an income qualified home buyer buy an existing house in town by the trust putting in the difference between what is the sale price and what makes it affordable to a household earning 80% of the area at median income, or some communities do 100% of the area median income. These are structured a lot of different ways, and but the similarities are that it tends to be high subsidy per unit, and it's a slow way to accumulate affordable housing, but it is a way to help folks access homeownership across the community, and it helps to preserve the more kind of naturally affordable, the smaller kind of starters type homes like Cape kind of homes. Cape style. So they're structured a variety of different ways, but that's the general idea is it's a small scale homeownership program. And then this has a lot of information on it, but what we have been seeing in more recent years is that more and more trusts are actively engaged in helping to support the creation of new affordable housing. And in most cases, the trust is just investing funds because the state requires a local match in order for them to allocate state and federal resources. They look to see that a development and applicant has local support, and that's usually shown with a cash contribution that typically comes through Community Preservation Act funds or Affordable Housing Trust funds. In some cases, we're seeing communities transfer land to the trust to go through the disposition process of disposing of public land for affordable housing. And I put in red just the population of the communities. So we do have some smaller communities, but they are communities that had some land, the Wellfleet and Sunderland. There was a parcel where it was allowable. But Lenox in Western Mass and in the Berkshires, the community of about 5,100 people, they have these new 65 units of affordable housing. It was a for-profit developer who does a lot of affordable housing development that partnered with the community. The community was quite supportive of this development. Wellfleet was actually a municipal site that was, they put an RFP, a request for proposals out, and two nonprofits came in together on that one, and now it's 46 units. Residents are moving in, if not right now, very shortly. Sunderland, this was completed a few years ago, and it's an age restricted. It's for 62 years old and above, out in Pioneer Valley. And then Medway was private sites that a nonprofit developer found, and the town actually asked them to buy the adjacent site and make it twice as large of a development. And so it has some non-age restricted housing, some age restricted housing there. And the trust and the CPC contributed. Templeton in central Massachusetts had a surplus school that they put out in a request for proposals, and a for-profit developer responded. And if you can see in that picture on your screen on the right, there's a new building that's attached to the older building. So the developer needed to add units in order to make it actually financially feasible, given the work on the existing school. And then in Orleans, a development that I actually don't know if it's private or if it was a private site or a public site, but a developer is building 62 units of non-age restricted housing there. So a variety of examples from all over the state, and we're seeing more and more of trusts actively involved in it, whether it's funding, in some cases it's with the disposition process as well. And then we have many examples of adaptive reuse, of reusing existing buildings for affordable housing. In Middleborough was a brand new CPA community when this happened, so they only contributed $25,000 at the time because they just didn't have more money than that. And this had been a shoe factory, and two nonprofits were able to partner and redevelop it into 25 units of housing. Williamstown, this had been a factory It actually might have been a mill building, a factory or mill building, but a for-profit developer was able to acquire it and then use a fairly small local contribution of $200,000 to build 42 units of rental housing in this and to bring it back online, this development back online. And then the two bottom ones are schools in Swampscott in the North Shore and Auburn and in Central Mass. So public sites, they put out with a request for proposals, and in Swampscott, it was a nonprofit organization that responded and built 38 units of age restricted, so housing for 62 years old and above. You can't see it in the picture, but they did add a building behind it to get up to 38 units to make it where they can make the numbers, make it work financially. And then Auburn, you might be able to see in the building that the back portion of that photo is the new building that was added. So 55 units of age restricted housing again, of communities of, you know, bigger than your community, but not all of them are, Cambridge. So seen some fantastic developments across the state. For preservation with CPA, so it's not defined in the trust statute, but just based on CPA, that preservation is typically is seen as preserving the affordability of units. So where there's expiring, it's sometimes called expiring use. So this is an example in Amherst where there was a large development of 204 units and a portion, 41, were affordable, but the restriction was only for 15 years. And it was coming up on expiring, and the owner at the time did not want to extend the affordability. The community was very concerned because you may know that Amherst has significant rental pressures with UMass Amherst and the other universities. So they reached out to MHP, and a decision was made to reach out to a developer, Beacon Communities, they are large. They have extensive experience in large developments, in Chapter 40B, in affordable housing. And they actually negotiated to purchase the development from the owner at the time. And the community decided to bond $1.25 million of CPA funds to go towards this development. So now these 41 units are considered affordable in perpetuity. So a trust would not be able to bond, but we do have trusts that are helping to keep an eye on any kind of expiring affordability, and then to be a part of trying to find a solution to maintain affordability beyond any expiring use on that. There is another kind of definition with preservation. So in the CPA statute, preserve is a high bar. It's risk of loss of the asset. So with housing, that might be the unit is just not livable. And that was happening in Gloucester in a housing authority building. So the housing authority requested some CPA money to combine with some state modernization formula funding in order to replace the roof, because they had already shut one unit. It was shuttered because of leaky roof, and they didn't want to lose others. Others were at risk. So they were able to put this under preserve because it was losing the asset. It was losing the affordable housing. So this is another way that a trust could, if you have existing affordable housing, to support these kind of large the structure of the unit. It's not about renovation where it's changing up the bathroom or replacing the floor, but it's these overarching efforts to make sure that the units can be lived in. And then support the kinds of activities that have been allowable under CPA, and so therefore are now allowed for trusts, is any kind of pre-development work on a municipal land if you're considering it for affordable housing. Updating housing plans and rental assistance is explicitly allowed in the CPA statute, so trusts could support rental assistance. And during the pandemic, it was in many communities, it was the Affordable Housing Trust that actually initiated emergency rent assistance programs. So that's something that trusts could engage in. And just three final things, and I'll turn this off and I'll stop sharing my screen, and then we can have some conversation if you want. But just to remember that the trust is a volunteer board with limited capacity. So consider your local infrastructure, the needs, as well as the resources locally. really try to develop goals that reflect identified need, not just the least controversial, but really what are the needs in the community and respond to that. And then be real about your capacity as a volunteer board. The needs are great, the resources are never enough, but if you focus intently on one or two, maybe three things, and try to do those well instead of trying to touch everything. And then we have many online resources. MHP has many different resources for trusts and just housing in general. And then my information, so you can get the slides from Allison and reach out anytime. We want to be here to support you in your journey. And I would love to stick around for some questions if there are any.
Yeah, I guess if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand, you can raise your hand. It's at the bottom of the screen. I think this is Deborah again. You're able to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I actually have two questions, similar to my last one about making financial decisions. If the town wants to donate land, does that have to be voted on at town meeting, or does the board have the right to just give land away? Which I kind of think the selectmen might need to be involved, but I'm not sure.
So normally, like the land would need to be deemed surplus, and that would be a vote at town meeting. And then my understanding is that there would be a vote to transfer it. I don't think that that's just a select board decision, but I'm not the expert in that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Allison might actually be able to answer that.
Yeah, that would have to be a town meeting vote too. You're correct.
Okay, and then my last question is, does affordable housing, does the new housing, the new stock or whatever the arrangement is on property, does it go to people in town or does it have to go to the statewide list?
So it's not really a statewide list, but so the state allows in new housing developments at initial lease up, the state will allow if the town has to make the case for it, would allow a 70% local preference up to 70%, but it's just for the initial lease up. So there are fair housing laws that are about having openness in our communities and between communities and making sure that people have the ability to access different communities. So it's considered a divergence from that, but the state will allow it an initial lease up.
When you say initial lease up, you mean when the property becomes available, it can go to a person in town, but after that person vacates, it could go to somebody else outside of town.
Yes, and I mean they would still need to apply, and there are still lotteries, so it's typically not first come first serve, at least with initial lease up. So there needs to be an open process because there are public resources in the project in the development. So there are processes that have to be followed.
Oh, so
but it's not like it's not really like it's just not like a state wait list. It would be specifically for the whoever's owning or managing the development would have a process for leasing up and subsequently when there's turnover.
So could you just clarify, because you just said something that confused me a little. So you said 70% local preference. Is that a given or does that even have to be approved by the state?
It has to be approved.
And what are the percentages that are approved? Do you have any idea?
Well, the community has to make the case of why you think that there should be local preference, and the state allows just 4 categories to qualify. So it's not everyone. It would be people who currently live in the community would be one category, people who work in the community, people who work for the community, or families of children in the schools. So those are the 4 categories. So it wouldn't be your adult child who wants to move back to town. That person would not qualify for local preference. Or if someone wants their parents, their seniors, to downsize and move to town, they would not be considered local preference, under local preference. So this just for the 4 categories, and then it has to be done through a lottery, and there are directions on how that happens, because It really is like HUD, this federal department doesn't allow local preference. It's something that Massachusetts does allow, but it's really it has to be well managed because there are federal fair housing laws that say you can't discriminate against different classes of people, and local preference potentially does actually discriminate. So there are guidelines of how it can be done to minimize the negative impact on protected classes.
Okay, thank you. I guess I have
Mhm.
one more unless other people are in line here. You mentioned the CPA funds, which have been very helpful to Nahant for various projects over the years. And it seems like the allocations haven't been as much lately because they're not so available at the state level. And then we hear all kinds of things about, you know, there's some budget deficits in the state and in Boston, for example. So while it's very exciting to think we could use CPC funds, I'm just wondering realistically if the state would have any plans to figure out other ways to contribute to the local markets to try and, help with the revenue sharing.
I don't know if the state, there's a state community preservation coalition, and they've done a lot of advocacy over the years, and they've been really responsible for helping to get additional funds into the state trust fund, community preservation trust fund. I don't know, and they've increased fees as well at registries. And your community being so small, if you passed it at, I don't know if you passed at 3%, but because you're a small community, you probably get a better match than a lot of the communities.
We did do
But
3%.
Yes, we have 3%.
yes, you know, okay. And then so you probably get, do you get 100% match? You probably get a pretty high match just because of being a small community and 3%. But anyways, I don't know of any efforts of increasing it
Really?
even more. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Rob has his hand up.
Yes. Hi, Shelley. Thank you
Hi.
very much for visiting with us tonight. You've given us a great deal of information that I think is critical in what we're trying to develop here. Uh, you were talking about priorities over Nahant residents versus others, and you talked about certain equations as far as developments are concerned. I'm curious if there's a difference in how that issue would be handled as far as local preference. I don't see Nahant doing any developments anytime soon, given
Mm.
our current lack of property to do so. But I could envision the possibility, based on whatever authority is granted to the trust by a bylaw approved at town meeting, I could foresee the possibility that maybe a single family home might be purchased or possibly a two-family home. Uh, and it could be, something that needs to, improvement so it could be put out on the rental market or whatever. But is there can you think of anything that would help us as far as local preference in something small like that?
Well, I I don't mean this disparagingly at all, but your community is so isolated, and you need a car. Like we have we have communities on like the outer Cape where they're so worried that it's gonna be people from off Cape and that people are gonna be rushing in. But when people learn how far away it is, how isolated it is, and that they need a car, like a lot of people say no to the housing, even if they come up in the lottery, like maybe they
Mm,
misunderstood where it was.
yeah.
I I I
Oh,
I don't, I don't, I just, it's hard for me to imagine that it's going to be a mad rush from people when it's far from services, it's far from, you need a car. So I would hope that you don't spend too much time getting on that, worried about that, because
yeah.
I think that it probably will end up being people who are already tied to your community, just because it's a tricky community. But if you're talking about one unit or two units, some of it will depend on, I mean, we want to see communities having open processes because we don't want to see discrimination against people. And so many of our communities are not all that diverse, and there could be some, and we want communities to be open. So I'm MHP. That's where we are. We want to see fair housing, but if you don't want the units on the subsidized housing inventory, then there won't be as much state oversight. It might not have to be quite as um, there may be ways to do it where it's still an open process, but where it's not the same as what the state requires. Like, I would hope that you don't get are too concerned about that, because your community is very unique, and most communities tell me that they're so unique, and I'm like, but your community really is very unique.
Mm.
And
We get
I
that a
can't
lot.
speak I can't speak too technically because I don't do lotteries. I don't do that. So I don't want to misspeak. But I just hope that you won't get too worried about that or a concern that there's going to be a mad rush of other people because your community is not easy. It can't be the easiest community to live in just because it's so far away from many services.
Understood. I appreciate your answer. I think Arthur, if we were to have a focus per se, it would probably be more towards workforce support, police, fire, DPW, possibly for the school, someone who wanted to move here and work in Nahant, that sort of thing. You see that a lot down the Cape, I believe. And so just so that we would have, I guess my question is more as far as do we have any control over it once it becomes available, or is it just a regular market? And I think you've answered that, and I appreciate that. I've got one more question. We talk a lot here. We have an aging population. I think a large portion of our um, population is uh, senior level, such as myself, and we're always concerned about how we can assist with people who are on the edge, people who might be having trouble making their tax bills, people who want to age in place. Is there an example you can give as far as how assistance can be given that to something like that through the trust?
So as I said, like rent assistance is explicitly allowed.
Hmm.
When you get into taxes, that is more questionable about whether that would be allowed, but rent assistance is explicitly allowed. Um, so I'll leave it at that. That there could be
Okay.
some ways that could be structured. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
I see that. Rob, you all set? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm all set. Yes. Thank you.
Jeff Lewis has his hand raised, so I'm gonna ask him to unmute. Hi,
Hi,
Jeff.
Bill. Hi, Jeff Lewis, 6 Ellsworth Road. Building off of Rob's question, two questions. One, affordable housing versus SHI qualified. Could you explain the difference in that local preference between affordable versus something that qualifies for SHI? And the second one is, could you explain a little how Vermont is using rental assistance or tax abatements in their community? And
Hmm.
I'll put my mic back off.
Yeah, so with the subsidized housing inventory with the state, so the state has specific parameters that are required in order for a unit to count on the subsidized housing inventory. So the state has outlined that, and that's a lot of that's tied to Chapter 40B. If a unit is not going to go on the subsidized housing inventory, then it wouldn't have to follow to a T what the state requires for the subsidized housing inventory. But we still have state and federal fair housing laws. Um, and so the community needs to be careful that you're investing, you're using public resources, investing in housing, and then you're making that housing available in a way that's not discriminative, that is respecting fair housing laws, both on the state and federal level. So we do suggest with communities. So there is a community, Leverett, in Pioneer Valley, and they have a um, down payment assistance and a buy down program that they help fund. And it's to 100% of the area median income. So none of these units including the buy down, the homeownership ones, they can't be on the subsidized housing inventory, but they still have a restriction and they still use a lottery. So they still use an open process because they're wanting to make sure that they're not in any way discriminating or violating fair housing laws. So even if it's not on subsidizing housing inventory, it's your municipality, you're using public resources. And even if you weren't using public resources, we still have fair housing laws. So you just need to make sure that you're not causing a disparate impact or making it difficult for certain classes of people that are protected from accessing housing because you're just prioritizing people that already live there. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is to be careful that even whether it's on the SHI or not, fair housing laws still apply. So, and Massachusetts has anti-discrimination law as well. So that's that. I'm not going to get into the details of Egremont because I won't say it correctly and I didn't prep for it, and so I don't want to misspeak. But Jeff is just mentioning that there's a new ability in the state for a tax credit for people who are renting their housing out as affordable housing. And so the town of Egremont, tiny little town of Egremont in the Berkshires, has allowed up to, it's like 15, it's fairly modest because they're a tiny community, but allowed up to 15 of these credits. And they have several in the community that they've allowed. So it just helps to incentivize more affordable rental housing. But in Egremont, they actually go up to, I think it's 200% of the area median income, which the guidance from the state allows under that particular statute. So it's one tool if you're doing smaller scale rental housing that you could decide to use to help incentivize people renting out existing homes as affordable. Yes, and there's more information. I could send Allison some of the information she could pass on and so forth, but
Great.
I don't want to misspeak and get too detailed on that.
Thank you. I did see another hand raised. I thought Josie had a hand raised. I don't see her anymore though. Where'd she go? Looks like Dave Walsh has his hand raised. Dave, if you can just unmute.
Yeah, a question for you. If someone were to donate a piece of property, say for tax purposes or because,
Mhm.
they, for tax purposes usually, um, and would the rules or zoning, et cetera, apply to any building that got done on that property? Or does that get overridden by this new program?
So trust can't override any of the local zoning at all. So something could be donated to the trust. And from my understanding from town council, because it's a municipal board, what I've been told is that there's tax benefits to donate to the trust as a municipal entity. But the trust cannot override local zoning in any way.
Thank you.
So, Allison, I'm off of mute now.
Oh, hi, Josie.
Hi, Josie Reese, 16 Bayview Avenue. Thank you so much for holding this. I know that lots of people have so many questions, right? And I just, I was part of the housing committee, so there's a couple of things that I just want to ask, number one, and note, okay? So my understanding, and the numbers may have changed, but for full transparency, there is at least, I heard 90 to 900 people on a waiting list to get into Nahant. So the likelihood of folks from outside of Nahant not being up in the lottery or having the option to be here is pretty low. Yes, we have a community where you need a car, but we also have a bus that goes around, and that's why we were required to do this. So, I want you to understand that it's a very high probability. People have been on this list for a long time. It is a very desirable community. So, we need to understand that how we craft any housing trust will need to take into consideration that there's a lot of people in line, right? And how do we get first preference for first responders, essential workers, Nahant residents? The second thing that I wanted to just say is, we don't, I wanted to ask a question. Many communities outside of Massachusetts do have similar kinds of trusts, but they do not focus on building. They focus on things like tax abatements for seniors and lower income individuals. Okay. They focus on incentivizing folks to accept vouchers for state rentals. So, is there a requirement by the state that it be a building focused trust?
So I'm going to start with respond to your first comment. So if the list that's referenced to, if that's the housing authority list, and there's one application statewide, and then people just check off different communities. So in the desperation, people will apply to many different housing authorities without really fully understanding where they are. So I appreciate that the lists they're long in every single community because there's such a need for housing. But I can tell you from conversation with so many housing authorities that when people learn where communities are, they oftentimes decide no because they weren't familiar with where it was. That even happens with lotteries, like in Wellfleet with a lottery, they'll sign up for a lottery of new housing development, and then when they realize just where it is, then they'll back off, they'll back away. So I'm not trying to minimize the community or act as if it's not desirable, but it's not an easy place to live if you're low income and you don't already have ties to the community. That was just the point I was trying to make. And with anything that the trust invests in, it won't use that list. That list is specific to housing authorities. That's a housing authority list. So there'll be a different process. It won't be the same. So I just wanted to make that clear. And two, there are restrictions on the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund statute because it's not set up for tax abatement. It's not set up for those different things. Yes, there are trusts in other parts of the country that might operate differently, but the enabling legislation in Massachusetts is just not really structured that way. That being said, the statute is implemented on the local level, and you'll work with your trust board and your council, your town council, to decide what the town feels is in the purview of your trust.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody else with a question for Shelley while she's here? This is obviously being taped, so we'll have the video available on the town's YouTube channel. I have the presentation slides that Shelley provided. I'll have those available on the nahant.org website. And we'll also create links to some of the other information that Shelley noted that's on the Mass Housing Partnership website as well. Oh, it does look like we have one more question. Is it Deb again?
No, surprise, it's Bob this time.
Oh, other Nahant resident. Hi, Bob.
Hi. I'm not quite even sure how to ask this. It seems like there's a bit of a leap of faith that's required in the sense that the suggested route is that you form the trust with all of the powers that the trust would need before you've established goals and objectives, before you've come up with a mission statement, before you've come up with anything like that. And I just am curious about how other communities have handled that, or am I just being a worrywart?
So most communities just accept the powers as they're written, but we do have communities that modify them. It's typically the bigger powers that, I mean, a lot of the powers are ones that probably would not worry you at all. It's the bigger powers. Like the one that's probably the most common is that the statute does allow a trust to borrow funds. And that's probably the one that I see modified the most. We have communities that will either expect it like a 2/3 vote of trustees versus just a majority vote, or they'll limit that you can only borrow up to a certain percent of the assets that the trust already has, or It'll require the select board to sign off on it. I've never seen a trust borrow funds. I've never seen that yet. And we've had this statute since 2005, and we have over 150 trusts. So I've never seen that. But for communities that have some concerns around some of the powers, they'll just work in modifying them. We do just be thoughtful about that, because you don't want to make it where the whole point of having a trust where it's a bit nimble. You don't want to limit it so much where you no longer have some of those advantages. At least most communities don't want to. So just be thoughtful about it. But you can modify the powers if there is a particular way that you think that it adds comfort for people.
I suppose it was a two-part question. One was about the
Oh.
powers. The second was about we would establish a trust before we knew really what the trust's focus was, and how that trust wanted to act.
Mm.
And it
Well,
seems like they're very interrelated, because what the trust's focus is and what the trust's proposed actions are really are what determines the powers that it should have.
well, except that
It's chicken and egg.
except that what the trust focuses on can change. So if you restrict it up front in a bylaw, then you're really restricting, you're saying that the trust can only do a very limited number of things forever, or you have to go back to town meeting to change it. So the statute allows all these different powers. Most of them are ones that most trusts don't use very often. Most trusts don't have, to be honest, enough money. I mean, money is really a challenge. And some trusts focus on other efforts that don't cost money even. So I haven't heard that kind of a concern from other communities, because directly what the trust focuses on can change given just changes in the community.
The key here is flexibility and adaptability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Tim Bell has his hand raised. Tim, if you want to unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The first one, I've been to a variety of town meetings where there's a warrant article where the town votes to accept gifts. Is it standard for these trusts to have that power without basically any review of accepting gifts?
I think that I don't know very many trusts where they've been in the position to get gifts. I know that there have been a couple on the Cape where a homeowner is looking to potentially leave a house in their will for the trust. So I don't know if there are a lot of examples. I think some of it, what you would lean on is protocol in the town, and I guess I can't say for sure. I don't know if there would be municipal law that would guide that, or if it would be based on the um, the way that the town does things, if it would be in the town bylaws. Allison, I don't know if you can speak to that better. I mean, I think the trust can just accept funds, kind of like a nonprofit, but I don't know.
I believe that it can too, per the state statute, but we also have town council on here. If you has anything to
Yeah.
add.
Yeah, it says right in the statute. I'll read it to you. The powers of the board include, quote, to accept and receive real property, personal property, or money by gift, and it goes on. So the statute, assuming we adopt those powers, does not require a town meeting to approve a gift. And that's part of the nimbleness that Shelley's talking about allowing the trust to act quickly when there's an opportunity to be had. And that statute allows for that. Now, we could modify those powers and say, you know what? We don't want to give the trust that power. So we just sort of omit that from the actual bylaws. That's our power. That's our home rule power.
Or you could say that the select board can have oversight to accepting gifts.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So I sort of see this as if the town were to approve it, it's basically creating a vessel, but until there's any stuff in it, it's a useless vessel. And so I'm curious, has the history been that towns will form a housing trust, appoint the people, and basically they talk for some period of time. I don't know if that's months or years. So now they say, okay, now we know what we're going to do. And then they basically start soliciting, they request warrant articles for funding mechanisms and stuff like that. But until there's funds coming into it, it doesn't really matter what powers it has until it has some money to do it with or assets to do it with.
I mean, they could be working on other things that don't necessarily take a lot of those powers, but yeah, I mean, there's, I've actually been on a call with a town planner and I've said, do you have a trust? No, we don't have a trust. And I'll Google it and I'll actually find that they did accept the statute years ago, but they just never appointed anyone. They never acted on it. So we have that. But yeah, I mean, you need to accept the statute. You need to appoint trustees. Like there are multiple steps. And remember that a select board member has to be on the trust. So you have key leadership in town that has to be on the trust. It is absolutely a municipal board. It's not an independent separate board. It's a municipal board. So there are different checks like that as well, in my opinion.
But my question is, what's the typical ramp up? You know, once the trust gets accepted, typically does it take a year or two to get created? Does it take less or longer than that to get funded?
So it depends on the community. We have communities that they, at the same town meeting, they will accept the trust statute and they'll accept an article to fund it through CPA funds. So they'll have the CPA funds after. So if there's a yes vote on the trust, then they'll vote to transfer some funds to the trust. So we have that. And we have other communities where the trust has to be established and then request fund from the CPC. So it just depends on the community.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I don't know. Is it Bob again that has his hand raised? You want to unmute?
No, he's making me ask the question this time.
Now it's okay. Hi, Deb.
I'm actually following up on something was just pursuing. I was wondering, of the 152 towns that have a trust, how many, what is the percentage or what is the number that actually have put money into the trust?
I'm sorry, I cannot answer that. I wish that we had that detailed of information, but I don't have that.
But there are situations where people establish them and then there's no activity. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have had that happen. So literally, I told the town in this one community, I told the town planner, oh no, it's coming up. When I Googled it, it's coming up that you have one. But they just never appointed anyone. So that happens occasionally. Or we have some that were established before the enabling legislation where they were through, my gosh, what's that process where you go through the legislature? The
Home rule.
Yeah, home rule. So we have about a dozen still that are home rule, but we have some that were that and they were not very functional. And then I need you to stop that. And then they transferred over to become a municipal affordable housing trust fund because it's a bit more nimble than what some of the individual communities were. So it's across the board, and we've seen. I mean, just in the last 6 years, it really was the pandemic. We've seen a huge influx of new housing trusts, like at a pace that was nothing like the past, where we would see maybe one new trust a year, maybe two. And then where the pace increased during the pandemic, where we were having 8 and 10 a year. And now it's kind of more like 4 to 6, where it slowed down some. But so we've just seen a huge influx of new trusts. And then as we're trying to do more trainings and more support, I think that more are becoming more active. And that just as the housing crisis is more severe, that communities are just seeing the need to have an active board. But we do have some that are just not very functional.
And just to follow on, do you think by allowing ADUs, which I know has been state law since 2024, and asking or forcing towns to adopt the MBTA 3A Act, that there could hypothetically be less of a demand for a housing trust because there are other avenues now that can help with this process. Yes,
Well,
no?
I don't think so, because the housing crisis is so severe and it's reaching up to so many much higher income levels today than it was 10 and 15 years ago even. The need is just so great. And the 10% that the state uses under Chapter 40B, that's just a number. It's not a reflection of the need. So um, I don't see that those things are slowing down the interest in a trust or the need to just have more capacity on the local level. But I don't think that a trust is necessarily the answer for every community. So I don't want to in any way give anyone the impression that that I think that it's some sort of, that I think it's the answer for every community. I don't necessarily think that it is. The community has to decide whether you think it's good for your community.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of your thoughtful answers. I appreciate it.
And I think Josie has another comment.
Yeah, I
Josie?
do. And thank you so much again for your patience. I just wanted to understand, and I think you just answered my question with your last comment. Are housing trusts required, or are they optional under the law?
It's optional.
Okay. So if they are optional and Nahant makes a decision that the current way the legislation works, we can work within those parameters and decide how we want to structure our housing trust. What happens if the all this legislation changes their guidelines? Are we required to adapt to some unknown because it's a law and we signed up to it? Or can we end a trust?
So I'm gonna turn to your town council on the first part, and you could actually, I'm wondering, town council, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, but
Dan.
I'm trying to think if the statute specifically says how to unwind a trust. I'm sure that you can
Right.
stop, but
Oh, yeah,
I'm
of
gonna,
course, you can just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not
What
perpetual
I'm
at
worried
all.
about is that, when you establish a trust based on law, right? That is optional versus mandatory. Optional, right? Mandatory laws we all have to abide by. But once we do that, are we locked in forever if suddenly some unusual law gets changed and the community is not really, that wasn't the intent of what the community wanted to do, right? And I've seen that before. I mean, we see it every day in federal government like crazy. So we can imagine seeing it on the municipal and also the state level. I just wanted to be sure that we are not locked into something that will potentially change without our consent.
I think
so
I'd like to
I'm gonna
weigh
let
in
town
on
council
this.
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that comes with establishing the trust bylaw, right? So right now we have a draft of a bylaw to establish an affordable housing trust in town that mirrors the state statute. But then once we accept that, it can only change by another, town meeting vote. So it becomes our bylaw. We mirrored it off the state, but it's our own bylaw. So if the state changes anything, the town doesn't automatically get impacted by that. That would be my read on it.
But there is a
Yeah,
winding down process if the town, for some reason, decides in the future that it just does not mirror what
Yes.
our requirements are. Thank you.
Yeah, it would just take another town meeting vote to,
Right.
disband
And hopefully
the
that
trust.
will never happen, right? But I just wanted to make sure that folks understood, that the state does not dictate ongoing how we manage it if we make a decision to fund it or establish it.
right. That's correct.
All right, I think that's all I saw for comments. I really want to thank Shelley for your time tonight. I think that this was really helpful. I hope that it answered some questions that residents had. Residents can feel free to reach out to me directly with, further questions or comments. And obviously this will be an ongoing conversation. So I do think an affordable housing trust is something that could be great for the town of Nahant. I envision some of the programming to be, like the rental assistance, and maybe helping somebody, buy a home in town. I don't see us taking over property or having large buildings. Obviously, there's not enough land for that. But I do believe that there is a need in Nahant for low and moderate income individuals to be able to stay here. So I think that this is a helpful tool.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Great.
All right.
Nice to be with you all.
Shelley, if you're able to stick on for 2 minutes
Sure.
with just Dan and Jeff and I and everybody else, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. It was very helpful.
Great. All right, I'm just wait a minute for. I'm going to stop recording.